Thank you very much. Having listened to the plenary, I know that the audio system here is very good and I don't have to shout, so I hope everyone can hear clearly. These sessions are quite short, so I'm going to cut to the chase, as it were. I could speak for a whole term or a whole year or a lifetime about corpus information concerning academic speaking, but today I'm just going to focus on two issues. I'm going to look at chunking, and I'm going to look at vague category marking, and I'm going to look at how these are carried over from everyday talk, that is ordinary conversation that we have in non-academic settings, into the academic world. As I say, there are many, many more things that one could talk about, but I'm just going to focus on those two issues because they are quite interesting in their own right. Starting with chunking, of course, this is has been the buzzword now for the last couple of decades since the advent of corpus analysis. One of the things that absolutely leaps out at you if you analyze any kind of corpus, whether it be spoken or written, but perhaps particularly spoken corpora, is the fact that words don't exist in isolation. They bunch together, they form clusters, chunks, lexical bundles, multi-word items, call them what you will, there are many terms. And nowhere is this truer than in real-time speech. It simply has to be. Real-time speech could not exist in its normal fluent fashion if we had to synthesize every word, find each word anew each time we needed it. So chunking is at the heart of fluent expression in all languages. I'm going to start by looking at a list of chunks in a couple of corpora. The two corpora I'm going to deal with today, one of them is the academic subcorpus of the CanCode corpus, which is a corpus that I and my colleague Ronald Carter created at the University of Nottingham in the 1990s. It was a 5 million word spoken corpus, and it had about 500,000, just shy of 500,000 words of academic data collected at the time by a fantastic researcher called Bethan Benwell, who's now a bright star in the University of Stirling. And she collected it across 4 different disciplinary areas in 2 universities. The second corpus is a rather interesting one. At first glance, it looks as if it might be far too specialized. It's a corpus gathered in a college of hotel management. But the lovely thing about it is, of course, nowadays, when you study hotel management, you do absolutely everything. You do business. You do nutrition, you do public relations, you do finance, you do construction. You do everything from, the nature of the soap in the bathroom to the deeper needs of the customer in terms of their food, their comfort and hygiene and so on. So it's a fantastic range of academic disciplines. Those are the two corpora I'll look at. And let's get straight down to it and have a look at this first list. This is the top 10 list from those two corpora of 3-word clusters or chunks. And we could spend a lot of time looking at them, and it always makes me laugh when the second most common chunk in academic talk is I don't know. Because we're all supposed to know, aren't we? But of course, when we look closer and drill down into something like I don't know, it's usually some kind of preface, a prefatory remark. I don't know if you've ever thought about blah, blah, blah. And this, of course, carries over from everyday conversation. I don't know if you saw that documentary on TV last night. It's a perfectly natural, nice way of topic raising or raising a question to which the listener might address themselves. But what I want to focus on here is this particular chunk in terms of, which occurs in the top 10 in both of these corpora, indeed right up at number 3 in the hotel management data. Perhaps doesn't surprise us, but I stopped for a while and I thought, well, what's it mean? Student puts their hand up, teacher, what does in terms of mean? And this was supposed to be a workshop, so you're supposed to be sitting there thinking, well, what does it mean? If anyone can come up with a pat definition, we haven't got a roving mic, but I'm sure you have an idea in your mind. To me, it means something like, this is the specific way in which I want to talk about this particular entity or concept or person or thing. I'm going to talk about X in terms of Y. So I'm going from X to Y, and that's crucial, okay? I'm looking out from X and saying, this is how I'm going to express myself about it. So on the face of it, it looks fairly straightforward, but it's not as straightforward as it might appear. Also, there is an interesting fact about it, that if we compare its occurrence in academic speaking with its occurrence in ordinary everyday conversation, the plain talk of the plain people, if you like, then we see that there's a huge difference. And we have a life lesson here, and that is if you're having an informal chat over a cup of coffee with your friends and they ask you about your holiday, don't start saying, well, in terms of the hotel, it was great fun. In terms of the currency exchange, it was pretty awful. Because very rapidly your friends will lose the will to live. Now, just want you to keep that chunk in mind in terms of, I'm looking at a concept, I'm going to talk about it in relation, looking outwards at various features of it. I'm going to jump to another chunk now, and I'm going to jump to a chunk that first struck me when I was looking at the wonderful MyCase corpus, the Michigan Corpus of Academic Spoken English, way back when I was very privileged to be one of the people who was invited into the discussions when it was being set up with Professor John Swales and his colleagues. And I remember at the time looking at chunks in MyCase and looking at the word sense. And at that time, it struck me that lecturers and teachers were constantly saying, does that make sense? Which is number 2 on that left-hand list there. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? God knows what happens if you say no. But the one I want to actually concentrate on is the first one there, in the sense that, which occurs as number 1 and number 2 in these 2 different corpora. And it struck me, well, this is very similar to in terms of, isn't it? Means more or less the same, doesn't it? But just think for a minute, what does it mean and how does it relate to in terms of? It's the most silent workshop I've ever led, but of course in this kind of setting we can't really have anything else other than me standing up here giving it that, so we'll go on that way. What struck me about in the sense that is, again, it relates a concept to something else, but this time we don't look out from the concept to various ways of talking about it. We have to look back from the concept to its meaning and to the various interpretations that could be put on that concept. So if you like, in terms of is going that way, in the sense that is going the other way. It's looking backwards. They're both very frequent, and indeed we can do the same exercise within the sense that we did within the terms that, in terms of. In relation to everyday conversation, there is a massive, massive difference in occurrence. So what we're saying is these 2 chunks, in terms of and in the sense that, they really are part of the DNA, the fingerprint of academic speaking. And their occurrence in conversation is probably confined to a rather pompous type of friend that you don't want to go out with talking like that. Now, so what do we do with these things? Well, there are of course 2 aspects to them in regard to teaching materials, that kind of thing. I mean, you can take an obvious example of the kind of thing that we often do, and that is that there are some gaps here, some blanks, and you have to fill them with either in the sense that or in terms of. Now, when I first looked at this, I thought, well, this is pretty easy, of course, because the answer lies in the syntax. In terms of is followed by a noun phrase, in the sense that it's followed by a clause. But of course, that's an after-the-fact choice. You choose the clause because you've already chosen in the sense that. You choose the noun phrase because you've already chosen in terms of. So in some senses, this kind of gap fill, it's retrospective, it's not prospective. It's not saying which expression do I need here. It's saying, well, which expression is going to fit here? And that's always one of the problems with this kind of activity. And I don't think, for that reason, I mean, the activity is fairly straightforward. They can do it, they can get it right, we hope. But of course, looking at any one of these, you could construct them in a different way, and you could actually choose a different syntactic way of getting out of the problem of the form that you've chosen. So what we've done here is we've given you a gap, and we've given you, if you like, a formal choice without really exploring the semantic and functional and epistemological choice that's involved here. So really, that's all I want to say about that, because time is racing on. I don't know where it's going, but it's disappearing like snow on the water, as the song said. And I'm going to jump to a different feature and then come back and tie up both features at the end, I hope. I'm going to jump next to vague category markers. These are sometimes called VCMs for short. They also have other names. And what they are ways of referring to whole categories of things, whole collections of things or people, without listing everything in that category. So if I meet you in the town centre and you're carrying shopping bags, and I say, you know, what have you been buying? And you say, well, I've just moved into my new flat, so I've been buying plates and cups and things. Plates and cups and things like that. It would be very perverse to stop you and challenge you and say, what do you mean, plates and cups and things like that? Why are you being so vague? You've never been straight with me, have you? This would be indeed a very perverse reaction. Of course, what is going on is that the speaker is encoding an assumption that you're going to know what I mean. You're going to have sufficient grasp of what I mean to actually know what plates and cups and that sort of thing means. Only the most ridiculously pedantic person would say, well, I've been buying 3 cups, 2 plates, 4 spoons, I've bought some soup spoons, bought some fish knives. I probably won't ever use the fish knives. I've also bought 3 coffee cups, 2 mugs. I bought a thing for hanging the mugs on. I bought some cushion covers, I bought some coat hangers. Again, by this time, you know, your concentration has wandered as a listener. So these are not only a useful part of communication, they actually make natural communication possible. We could not communicate naturally, fluently, confluently with our listeners. I often like to use that term confluence because we're creating a flow that is carried on by all the parties in a conversation. We're creating and maintaining that flow by referring to things that we assume the other person will understand. Now, the key there is assumption. It's a projection. Nothing is ever certain, as we know from our experience of life. But we'll have a look at a couple of examples here from the data. This is from a stylistics supervision in the beautiful University of Nottingham. And the supervisor says this, yeah, have you done anything on the intentionalist fallacy and the effective fallacy and that sort of thing? Well, that's quite important because I don't think you can ever demonstrate what a writer's intentions are. And I think there must be very clever people in the English department who know what the effective fallacy and the intentionalist fallacy are. I'm not particularly aware of what they are. I can sort of make a guess. But at this point, the poor student is either going to have to say, well, no, I haven't done that yet, or, you know, fess up and say, you know, what are those? Now, the tutor at this point has projected the assumption that at this point in your academic career, you're supposed to know what these are. These are supposedly bits of given information. But don't forget that is a projection. I don't know how many people here, put your hands up, how many people know what the effective fallacy is? Well, as my neighbour would say, and you're supposed to be university people. What did they teach you at university? Okay. Well, it illustrates quite well the problem that is encoded in these projections, these vague category markers. But it gets worse, or depending on your subject, it might get better. But for me, it gets worse. Here are two extracts from medical school lectures. Before we go on to the third lecture, where we talk about the liver and pancreas and so on, and then later on, by the time of birth, the liver constitutes about 5% of the weight of the embryo, and blood cell production is moving then to the bone marrow and so on. Now, one can imagine a medical textbook that says, you know, at this point the blood moves to the bone marrow and so on. It would be highly unlikely to find that in a textbook, in a written text, because written texts, we normally expect them to be a bit more explicit. The bone marrow, this, that, and the other, as shown by, you know, so-and-so's research. But in the spoken academic context, we constantly find these projected references that you, the learner, will know what the bone marrow is and so on. Here's another one from an archaeology field trip, and I breathed a sigh of relief when I found this one, because I think I can decode this one, even though I'm not an archaeologist. Okay, so as you go around actually in spots like this, where the actual material is exposed, you see the bank is made up of obviously soil and stones and so forth. And I think the obviously is the giveaway here, that you don't need any highly specific knowledge to imagine what a bank of earth around an archaeological site might be made up of. The research into these vague category markers has been much and varied, and one particular piece of research that I enjoyed, indeed supervising at the time, was that of Anne O'Keefe in the University of Limerick in Ireland, and she looked at these kinds of projected markers as they were used on the radio. And she came to the conclusion that there were roughly three kinds. There's the kind that any human being can decode, yeah? That anybody who has normal world knowledge will be able to decode. Then there is a kind of mezzanine level of markers which you need to belong to a, shall we call it a community, a discourse community, to be able to decode. Then there are highly specific markers that are maybe even used by very small in-groups within those larger groupings. So for the EAP teacher, there is something of a problem here, and that is, you know, how do you deal with this if you're doing a listening activity or whatever? It seems to me you have two courses of action. You can either ask the students, well, what's the bone marrow and so on. Tell your partner what the bone marrow and so on means. What's the and so on? What's the and so forth. Or, of course, you can go in the other direction to a collaborative exchange with subject teachers. What you can't do is look it up in a dictionary. You can look up bone marrow, but you can't look up bone marrow and so forth. You're not going to find that in a dictionary. You're not going to find it in a written textbook either. So this is quite a dilemma. This is something that exists in the space of real-time speaking. Okay, let's zoom on, because time is not on our side. This is from the hotel management data, and we have two of them in a very short space of time. No point in reading the whole thing here. Leisure time and time in lieu of extra hours, overtime worked, and all that kind of thing. Fairly straightforward, relatively easy to decode. But then later on, just seconds later in the same lecture, further down there, and with that you talk about your standard template, your social demographic statistics, your population statistics, your age profile, your population pyramids, your tree pyramids that you would have done in geography in school, and things like that, okay? So two things of interest here. We have these markers and things like that, but it's all yours. It's your tree pyramids, your population profile. Now this is common in this particular data, that the lecturers are constantly saying to the students, you possess all this. The hotel is actually yours. You're only learning about hotels, but actually already you've got a hotel. There's one in your head. It's your hotel. And you've got to think about your population, your age profiles, your tree statistics, your pyramids, whatever they are. So this is using the vague category markers as a way of saying, yes, you're already in the family. It's a gatekeeping enterprise to be in this college for 3 or 4 years. But as we open the gates, all this belongs to you. So we have this constant way of reaching out to the students and saying, you're not reading about something abstract, you're not even writing about something abstract. We're actually talking about something that we all possess. Now, one of the things, I'm going to conclude now so that we have at least 5 minutes to exchange ideas. One of the things that I feel very strongly about as a corpus linguist is that we're very good at saying, you know, I've got all these secrets from the corpus and I'm going to put them into a book and make a fortune. You might accuse me of that. I couldn't possibly comment. But it seems to me that there are two, shall we call them effective fallacies here. The first effective fallacy is that the general population of teachers are someone to whom you give the corpus information. The second effective fallacy is that then teachers or materials give the corpus information to the students, and I think we've been guilty of that. And I'm looking for a more collaborative approach and open this to your thoughts and views on this, and that is that why not share this corpus information? Why not make it public that these are the vague category markers that are most frequent in the corpus? And so on, etc., and so forth, etc., etc., and so on and so forth. These are statistically the most common ones. And there is another type which uses the alternative conjunction or whatever, or something like that. Why not point out to everybody that vague expressions are common in informal conversations, stuff, and that kind of stuff, but be careful not to use them in formal context. If in doubt, only use, and so on, and so forth, and etc. And of course, you can use these markers in writing. I have a very good couple of scientist friends who say, well, we never say things like, and so on and so forth in science. That's impossible. We cannot possibly transmit our knowledge using phrases like and so on and so forth. Well, of course, any investigation of academic writing finds etc. everywhere, and the like everywhere, and similar everywhere, which are just posh forms of and stuff like that. Okay? So we can't avoid them, whether it be writing or speaking, but they just seem to be that much more common in speaking. And in speaking, they do seem to have this way of saying, you know, this is an inclusivity. So it seems to be that all this points to a collaborative space. And to tie up what I want to say, I want to go back to the chunks of, in terms of and in the sense that I'm not an expert. I don't know how you would speak about a particular concept, either in any particular sense or in any particular terms. And that's where we all have to collaborate, if you like. It seems to me that it's very dangerous for me to say, okay, so we're going to speak about so-and-so in terms of so-and-so. That's why we need corporate, to see precisely the kinds of terms that people do speak in and the kinds of senses that they speak in as well. So collaboration with one another, first and foremost, because many of us do have specific disciplinary knowledge and can share that. And I don't think there's enough of that goes on. And of course, collaboration across disciplines. Thank you very much. That's all I want to say.